very excited to welcome a new sponsor to Property Tribes, and when it comes to EPCs, we've now got you covered because we're being joined as a partner by EPC Choice. And on this call with me is founder and CEO Chris Grant. And Chris, you're much needed at Property Tribes. We have a lot of discussions about EPCs, but before we kind of really dig deep into what's happening with EPCs and their relevance in the private rented sector, I thought a good place to start would be, could you give us an overview of the company? And, you know, you're a landlord yourself as well, aren't you?
I am, Vanessa, yeah, and it's great to be associated with Property Tribes. So I started EPC Choice back in 2008. I was one of the UK's first qualified energy assessors, but that came off the back of 25 plus years in property, from agency through to development and being a landlord, as you've mentioned. I saw a gap in the market there with my property connections I had anyway to meet what was a legislative demand in 2008 associated with the Home Information Pacts. The work that I generated from that sort of rapidly expanded right across the UK, and as a result of that, we built EPC Choice into the largest panel of energy assessors in the UK now. We serve all parts of the country, providing EPCs, both domestic and commercial, and consultancy advice on achieving higher ratings and energy efficiencies for landlords. Yeah, that brings us to where we are today.
It does indeed. And I think a good further point would be, could you just kind of give us the touch points of where EPCs come in during the landlord life cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. So the trigger point for a landlord is always a new letting. So you would have to have a valid EPC in place. There is some debate over whether an EPC is required on renewal of a tenancy. From our point of view, and this is just not self-serving, but there is a benefit to having a valid EPC throughout the tenancy lifespan, particularly if you're in a local authority that has landlord licensing. If they're introducing that at any point, they will ask for a valid EPC. So again, if it's expired during the tenancy or mid-tenancy, then there'll be that requirement to get a valid EPC in place. And obviously the other consideration is that with the minimum energy efficiency standard, that needs to be an E rating or above to be able to legally let the property.
And some lenders like to have an up-to-date EPC as well. And also, obviously, if you're going to sell your rental property, then you would need one to market it for sale as well, wouldn't you?
You would, yeah. So again, a legal requirement to sell any property. And it's a very interesting point from the lender's point of view. Probably 30% of our business is for landlords that are refinancing, not only landlords, but homeowners as well. And although this is yet to be a legislative requirement, mortgage lenders are under an obligation to ensure that the average rating of their lending portfolio is at C rating and above. Now, what they're doing to achieve that is incentivizing landlords with higher rated EPC properties by discounting the rates. And you can see anything between a 0.5 even up to a whole point percentage discount for C rated properties above, and similarly with B rated and above as well. So although the minimum energy efficiency requirement hasn't been increased to C rating, which was much muted in the press, there is an incentive there for landlords to achieve higher ratings to benefit from discounted interest rates.
So-called green mortgages, and we're seeing more and more of them coming through, aren't we? And it's quite interesting because I think lenders are looking at, when you've got a portfolio landlord, they're looking at the EPC rating across the entire portfolio, and that kind of chimes with what you said, that 30% of your business is coming from remortgaging, where landlords are having to meet lender criteria.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's, there is also a certain social responsibility from, a landlord's point of view. With my landlord hat on, what I've always said is that obviously if a property is more energy efficient and you're finding that the tenant is paying less on their bills, then the risk of default is minimized because there's more money there to go around, and your rent should take a priority over, excessive bills. So it's a worthwhile investment to bring your rating up.
No, I totally agree. And I think tenants are becoming more aware of energy efficiency because of the cost of living crisis and the cost of energy bills. And they are looking at energy efficiency when they're choosing a new rental property. So it could help attract, a tenant that is aware of these issues, and is maybe willing to pay a little bit of a premium rent for a very energy efficiency property because their bills will be lower.
Absolutely, we're seeing more and more of this. And the point we stress to landlords is that if you have two identical properties, one with, for example, a B rating and one that's just scraped an E rating, I can almost guarantee that higher rated EPC property will let well ahead of the lower rated one. So it's a big consideration for tenants now.
Well, you've touched there on a bit of a sore point for landlords with EPCs, and you'll be aware of this, Chris, because we often hear of a landlord that has two identical apartments in the same block, and there's no difference between them at all, and one will get a C rating and one will get a D rating, and you can't fathom it. So what do you say to that?
It's a very valid point. I mean, you'll always see variations within a block. So, for example, the properties that are situated within the middle of a block, i.e., property above and below, will always have a higher rating than the property located on the ground floor, and similarly, the property located on the top floor. And that's due to something called heat loss perimeter. So that's the fact that that property has more exposure to heat loss being on the bottom and as I said, on the top. There is also the issue, and we come across this with variations in the competency of energy assessors. We're uniquely positioned in that we have very strict criteria that we impose on the energy assessors that work for us. So they all have to have completed a minimum of 2,000 EPCs, which sounds like a lot, but if you're actively producing EPCs, you'll achieve that. We make sure that their CPD is up to date, and similarly, we provide our own CPD. So I can say with some certainty that our energy assessors are amongst the most qualified in the UK, and that just irons out those inconsistencies that you'll see from new entrants into the EPC market.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now, energy efficiency has been a point of great uncertainty for landlords over quite an extended period. We thought legislation was coming in, then it was pushed back, and now we've got a general election coming, and well, that uncertainty still remains. But I think, and I just wondered if you agreed with me, Chris, it's a definite direction of travel towards energy efficiency in rental properties. So there's no real getting away from it, is there? And I'm kind of thinking that landlords, if they have properties sub C, they should be thinking about making energy improvements, regardless of if we know what the exact legislation is going to be.
Yeah, I think landlords with a degree of foresight do need to be considering this. The government route to net zero, which is a good few years away, that is supported by a document called the Pathway to B. Now, this potentially can impose a minimum of B rating as soon as 2030. So landlords do need to consider that the C-rated interim from 25 to 2027, obviously that was scrapped courtesy of Rishi Sunak. As you said, we could well see a change in legislation. Labour are not particularly clear on their position in terms of EPCs. I think their green credentials are up there with the Conservatives, but it's likely to be off the agenda in the run-up to the election because it's not particularly popular policy for landlords with the other high degrees of compliance that they're facing at the moment. So I think election out of the way, and then we should see some good firm policy statements from whoever eventually takes office to get landlords back on track and with some firm direction, which is very much needed.
Yes, very much needed. Now, if a landlord is undertaking a refurb, would your advice be to undertake the highest level of energy efficiency measures that they can? Because to my mind, if you're going to go to all the trouble of doing a refurb, you might as well, future-proof your property and go for an A+ rated boiler and any other measures like that, where you can really, get the maximum energy efficiency out of your property in one hit. Would you agree with that, Chris?
I think the key to it, from any landlord's point of view, is really to consult an energy assessor prior to undertaking works. There are limitations to the EPC software, which is standardized throughout the industry. But landlords are often caught out with one of the most obvious ones is a swap over to an electric boiler, which might seem like a great idea. You've got no gas safety inspections on an annual basis. It just comes out under your 5-year EICR. Unfortunately, electric boilers, and I'm sure the electric boiler industry will be hunting me down after this, are the kiss of death when it comes to EPC ratings. Electricity, because of the unit cost, will undoubtedly reduce your rating. So, and this has caught so many landlords out over the years where they've invested substantial amounts of money in an electric boiler for the reasons I've said, only to find that they've potentially taken their property well below E rating. So good to consult an energy assessor. We can advise on the levels of insulation that will produce the most sort of bang for your buck when it comes to an EPC.
Okay, well, that's really, really good to know. Now, I know that you were keen to join Property Tribes because you very much subscribe to landlord education and raising standards in our sector through educated and informed landlords. So I think it's so great that you're both a landlord and an EPC assessor, and I'm really hoping that you'll be able to join our discussions and share some of your knowledge with the PT community.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I think I'm sort of fairly uniquely positioned, Vanessa. There's been very little that I haven't experienced as a landlord, over the past sort of 30 years now.
Mhm.
Yeah, still have a good size portfolio that I manage. And it's often the case that when we get incoming landlord inquiries, and my team at the office, we're quite uniquely positioned in that everybody that works for me, even the office-based staff, are all energy assessors. So if you're contacting us, you've got that assurance that you're dealing with somebody that actually knows what they're talking about, which can be a rarity in our industry.
Mm.
But yeah, I often find myself dealing with landlords that haven't even got an EPC and they're now struggling to serve a Section 21. So we relish the opportunity to give them the best advice we can and provide those solutions over and above just being an EPC provider.
Well, that's awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the PT community about the work that you do? Any other topics that you think we could have covered in this interview? Is there anything else just to close this out?
Well, you've touched on all of the sort of contentious points on the minimum energy efficiency standard. Great that you brought up the green mortgages because that's a really relevant issue at the moment. Hopefully, we'll get some certainty on EPCs post the election, and we can continue to do the work that we do to keep landlords not only compliant but to improve their energy efficiency across their entire portfolios, which is going to be key going forward.
I totally agree. And you're going to keep the faith with buy-to-let and your own portfolio, are you, Chris?
Well, yeah, I mean, despite all of the obstacles that are thrown in our way, such as Section 24, landlord licensing, it's in my core. I think anybody that's been a landlord for as long as I have is probably committed until I sort of finally hang up my boots and settle the massive CGT bill that's likely to come my way. So.
Well, we've spoken a few times off camera, and I really do sense that in you, that it's in your core And I can really relate to that because I feel like that myself about buy-to-let. But it's so great to have EPC Choice on board with Property Tribes and to have your knowledge and domain expertise supporting the tribe. And I'll put all the contact details for EPC Choice below this video so that our members can get in touch with you and take advantage of your service. So all that remains to be said, Chris, is welcome aboard to Property Tribes.
Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, really looking forward to it.
Thank you.